What if I told you that Charlie Kirk's death might not be as simple as the headlines say? Candace Owens claims billionaires he once worked with turned on him. Netanyahu is tying it to global extremism, and the FBI insists it was a lone attacker. Today, we're diving into the power struggles, hidden messages, and the shocking connections that could change everything you think you know. On September 13, 2025, Candace Owens stirred attention on X with a post that immediately caught traction. She claimed that Charlie Kirk had found himself in a tense standoff with several influential billionaires, individuals who had once financially supported him over the issues he had been speaking out about. According to Owens, the pressure on him during the previous 2 weeks had been overwhelming. She hinted that hidden truths and private exchanges would soon surface, and that Kirk's movement, despite the turmoil, would ultimately rise stronger. Her post gained over 10 million views, serving as a prelude to a new video she released on her own channel. For context, Owens' connection to Kirk dates back years. She joined forces with him early in the days of Turning Point USA, alongside Officer Tatum. That partnership significantly boosted her visibility in conservative circles. Owens played a key role in promoting Black conservatives within the Republican movement, while also launching initiatives such as Black. Initially, her stance aligned closely with Kirk's, particularly in support of Israel, but her trajectory shifted after she joined the Daily Wire. Over time, Owens began reshaping her position on Israel, eventually clashing with her employer to the point of being dismissed for her outspoken commentary. Ironically, leaving the Daily Wire only expanded her platform and audience. Kirk, however, never wavered on his support for Israel, and figures like Officer Tatum stayed firmly in that camp as well. Meanwhile, Owens and other polarizing personalities on the far right, such as Nick Fuentes, Andrew Tate, and others, took a different path, siding with Palestine. This created a visible divide within the conservative movement. On one side, the more mainstream conservatives like Kirk and Tatum who backed Israel, and on the other, a coalition of hardline voices who opposed it and rallied behind Palestine. This ideological split fueled ongoing tension and public disputes between the two factions. When examining the bigger picture, it becomes clear that Kirk's controversies extended far beyond the cultural issues he often addressed at home. His entanglements reached into geopolitics, making him a figure whose challenges and conflicts were far broader in scope than many realized. After his passing, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat down for an interview with Fox News, where he addressed the situation directly.
I have to say that we're just heartbroken. Myself, my wife, my family, my son actually, on his 2019 visit to Israel, had lunch with him and his wife, Erica. We're shattered first as human beings because a great human being has been taken from us. Was an extraordinary friend. He wrote me a letter on May 2nd.
In his interview, Netanyahu spoke warmly about Charlie Kirk, pausing often as though the memories weighed heavily on him. He emphasized not only the public alliance they shared, but also the personal bond that had developed behind the scenes. Netanyahu described Kirk as someone who carried conviction with unusual clarity, a man unafraid to walk into rooms filled with skepticism and still speak with confidence. That quality, he said, was rare in younger leaders, and it was part of what made their relationship stand out. The admiration was unmistakable. Netanyahu painted a picture of Kirk as more than just a political ally. He saw him as a friend who was sincerely invested in Israel's survival and future. The Prime Minister recalled the times Kirk had written to him, including a personal letter filled with gratitude, where Kirk spoke of the shared values binding the United States and Israel. Netanyahu noted that Kirk's support wasn't shallow or transactional. It stemmed from a belief that Israel's struggles were intertwined with the fight for freedom everywhere. He even mentioned Kirk's invitation for him to visit, a gesture he framed as a symbol of Kirk's openness and willingness to bridge divides. But Netanyahu's remarks didn't end with nostalgia or praise. He shifted, almost deliberately, toward a larger story, one that cast Kirk's life and death within the context of broader struggles. With intensity in his voice, he suggested that Kirk's assassination was not merely a tragic, isolated act, but a sign of the hostile environment facing voices who champion Israel and free expression. Netanyahu leaned into a familiar theme, that across the world, forces hostile to democracy were linking arms in unexpected ways. He singled out what he called a strange union between radical Islamists and ultra-progressive activists. On the surface, they might appear ideologically opposed, Yet, in Netanyahu's eyes, they had become allies of convenience, united by a shared desire to undermine Israel and silence its defenders. This was where his tone sharpened. He accused these groups of cloaking themselves in the language of human rights and free speech, while in practice resorting to violence and intimidation. He drew parallels to his own life, noting that he too had been targeted by assassination attempts, just as President Tribe had faced repeated threats. To him, Kirk's death fit into a disturbing global pattern, one where extremism had no borders, and where political rhetoric could quickly turn into bloodshed. Netanyahu's framing was as much about shaping public perception as it was about honoring Kirk. By linking Kirk's death to this global conflict, he suggested that the attack was not only a personal loss for friends and family, but also part of a wider battle between democratic societies and their enemies. His message seemed carefully calibrated to position Kirk as a martyr of sorts, someone who had been caught in the crossfire of ideological and geopolitical wars larger than himself. And yet, beneath Netanyahu's words was also a sense of frustration, almost a defensive edge. He seemed to be pushing back against critics who accused Israel of being too quick to point fingers or of using tragedies to further its own narratives. By emphasizing the unity of extremists across ideological divides, he was effectively telling his audience, this is not just about Israel, it's about all of us. Whether it was attempts on his own life, threats against global leaders, or the violent silencing of Kirk, Netanyahu wanted to paint a clear picture of a common enemy shared across borders. This part of the interview was striking because it blurred the line between tribute and political argument. On one hand, Netanyahu's admiration for Kirk seemed genuine, rooted in their shared exchanges, letters, and personal respect. On the other, it became a platform to weave Kirk's legacy into the fabric of a larger geopolitical struggle. To listeners, this duality raised important questions. Was Netanyahu simply honoring a fallen ally, or was he strategically using Kirk's death to reinforce a long-standing narrative about Israel's place in the world and the threats it faces? What cannot be denied is that his words carried weight. They revealed how deeply entangled personal relationships and political agendas can become, and how the loss of a single figure like Kirk could be framed not only as an individual tragedy but also as part of a global story. Netanyahu's warmth was genuine, but his urgency was unmistakable. To him, Kirk's death was not just heartbreaking, it was a warning.
This year, he said, one of my greatest joys as a Christian is advocating for Israel and forming alliances to defend Judeo-Christian civilization. A few weeks before the tragedy yesterday, I called him and I spoke to him and I said, please come to Israel. I invited him to Israel. And sadly, that visit will not take place. But he was a defender of our common Judeo-Christian civilization. He was unbelievably excited to walk in the footsteps of Jesus here. He valued our bond, the bond between America and Israel. He did so many things to defend free speech. He had his truth. He stood up for it. But he said, you can come and debate me.
Netanyahu shared that Charlie Kirk had once written him a personal letter, thanking him and even extending an invitation to visit Israel. But then his tone shifted, moving from the personal to the political. He painted a picture of a global struggle, where extremist groups form unlikely alliances. In his view, radical Islamists and ultra-progressives often rally under the banners of human rights and free speech, yet turn to violence when faced with opposition. He tied this idea directly to recent events, pointing to attempts on the lives of high-profile figures. President Tribe, he claimed, had nearly been assassinated twice. Netanyahu himself had been targeted as well. And now, Charlie Kirk had fallen victim. To Netanyahu, these weren't isolated incidents, but part of a larger pattern. His message was clear. The same extremists who threatened him and Trump were the ones responsible for Kirk's death. That framing, however, stood in stark contrast to Candace Owens' perspective. While Netanyahu folded Kirk's death into a narrative about global extremists united against Israel, Owens approached the situation differently, focusing more on political tensions within the conservative movement itself. To understand those tensions, it's important to recognize the financial backdrop. Kirk and Turning Point USA received significant funding tied to Israel, which inevitably shaped expectations. While Kirk could claim independence as an American voice, his donors often saw things differently. When money and influence intersect, even the appearance of criticism toward Israel could spark conflict. This dynamic came to a head in 2021. During an event in Tampa Bay, Tucker Carlson raised questions about Bill Amen, a wealthy Israeli billionaire. That moment triggered outrage. Supporters of Israel accused Carlson's comments of crossing into anti-Semitism, and because the event was tied to Turning Point USA, the backlash spilled over onto Kirk. Even though Kirk hadn't spoken the words himself, the association left him vulnerable. It was the same pattern seen in other controversies, like Nick Cannon's podcast with Professor Griff, which drew fierce criticism and led to suspensions. Once Israel or its allies were perceived to be under attack, even by association, the response was swift and severe. Kirk found himself caught in that cycle repeatedly, challenged for being too soft or too balanced in his remarks. He wasn't alone. Others like Megyn Kelly faced similar push. For Kirk, these clashes underscored how precarious the balance between donor support, political speech, and ideological loyalty had become.
And you know, this is a worldwide problem. The people on the on the extremes, the Islamists, the radical Islamists, and their union with the ultra progressives, they often speak about human rights. They speak about free speech, but they use violence to try to take down their enemies. Whether it's President Trump, who's been almost assassinated twice, or they try to kill me here too. But they got Charlie Kirk, and it's just heartbreaking.
At this point, Kirk's frustration was undeniable. Those close to him said it showed not only in his words but in his posture, his tone, and even the way he carried himself in public appearances. He had grown weary of the constant accusations that seemed to follow him at every turn. No matter what position he took, no matter how firmly he reiterated his support for Israel, someone somewhere was ready to twist his words or question his loyalty. It was exhausting. What was once a bond, rooted in mutual admiration, now felt to Kirk like a burden one that came with strings attached and expectations he wasn't sure he could, or even wanted to, meet anymore. His stance was clear, and he never shied away from saying it outright. He loved Israel. He respected its resilience, admired its history, and believed deeply in its alliance with the United States. But what began as a relationship built on genuine conviction had turned into an endless cycle of second-guessing and accusations. Each time he hosted an event, wrote a column, or appeared on stage, there was an undertone of suspicion waiting in the wings. Was he being supportive enough? Was he using the right language? Did his silence on one issue mean disapproval? This relentless scrutiny was more than just irritating. It was disillusioning. And beneath that frustration lay something deeper, creeping sense of futility. For a man like Kirk, who thrived on building movements and inspiring followers, the constant pushback felt like erosion. The louder he proclaimed his support, the less it seemed to matter. Instead of recognition, he received skepticism. Instead of gratitude, he received demands. The relationship, once energizing, now felt suffocating. This tension was sharpened by the realities of money and influence. Turning Point USA, Kirk's flagship organization, had benefited from financial backing tied to Israel and its supporters. On the surface, that support helped fuel rallies, conferences, and outreach that built Kirk's reputation. But every dollar came with invisible weight. It meant there were boundaries he was expected not to cross, lines of criticism he was never supposed to approach. Kirk knew this. He wasn't naive. Still, living under that constant reminder made him feel boxed in, as though his independence had been compromised. The very mission of free thought and debate that Turning Point had championed seemed to clash with the obligations that came with donor loyalty. Netanyahu's personal outreach added yet another layer of complexity. The Prime Minister had not only publicly praised Kirk but had also extended personal invitations, urging him to visit Israel as a sign of reconciliation during times of friction. On the surface, such gestures appeared warm, even flattering. Yet to Kirk, they also carried subtle pressure, an expectation that he must continue aligning himself publicly and unapologetically with Israel's agenda, regardless of the internal criticism he faced back home. What might have once felt like honor now began to feel like obligation. It was in the middle of this storm that Candace Owens stepped forward with her own perspective. Owens, never one to shy away from controversy, seemed to sense the fracture lines beneath Kirk's polished exterior. She knew the toll that constant accusations could take, because she had walked a similar path herself. Her entry into the conversation wasn't just commentary, it was intervention. By speaking up, she positioned herself both as a critic of the pressure Kirk faced and as someone willing to name the forces that others only hinted at. Her words carried weight because they tapped into what many suspected, but few dared to articulate: that the relationship between conservative influencers and foreign interests was not always clean, not always simple, and certainly not always fair. By stepping in, Owens did more than just defend Kirk. She widened the conversation, forcing people to confront uncomfortable truths about money, loyalty, and influence in American politics. Against the backdrop of Kirk's growing weariness, her voice was both disruptive and clarifying. Kirk's frustration, then, was not just about his own experience, it was emblematic of a larger conflict at the heart of modern political movements, the tension between personal conviction and external pressure, between grassroots authenticity and donor-driven expectations. His exhaustion symbolized the cost of playing a game that, in the end, seemed impossible to win.
Whatsoever, such as hosting a focus group, right, Megan? With a bunch of our students that went viral, having Dave Smith or Tucker at my event. It is all of a sudden, oh, Charlie is he's no longer with us and all that. I said, wait a second, what do you mean? What does with us mean exactly, right? I'm an American, okay? Like, I represent this country, and I don't even understand that paradigm. But Megan, I think you would agree with this. I want to make sure we really zero in on this. Personality types like you, myself, and Tucker, the more that you guys privately and publicly call our character into question, which is not isolated, right? Megan, it would be one thing if it was one text or two texts. It is dozens of texts.
Yes.
Then we start to say, hold the boat here. And to be fair, some of my really good Jewish friends are like, that's not all of us, it's all, but these are leaders too, though, right? These are stakeholders, right? And so, look, I'm afraid because, again, I want civilization to win. I want the West to win. I don't want the Islamo-fascist barbarians to storm the gates of Jerusalem. I want the holy sites protected. I believe in the Holy Land. I love that Jesus walked on water there and rose from the dead and preached in the Mount of Beatitudes. Like, I feel the connection to Israel. But at the same time, simultaneously, when the hostile reaction is that now Megan and Charlie are enemies,
right?
Boy, I'll tell you, like, you're not gonna, I wouldn't say lose, but you will weaken and just basically deflate two of your strongest advocates if that continues.
Candace Owens claimed that only weeks ago, Bill Ammon, the same billionaire at the center of the 2021 Turning Point USA controversy, had met with Charlie Kirk in the Hamptons. According to her, Ammon confronted Kirk about past comments related to Israel, echoing the same tensions that had boiled over years earlier. She even suggested that threats were made during those exchanges, though no concrete evidence has surfaced to confirm such claims. Owens' implication was heavy, that Israel itself might have had some role in the escalating pressure surrounding Kirk. This is where things become complicated. On one hand, the FBI maintains that Kirk's assassin was a lone actor, someone from Utah with a background that tied him to the right, but who also identified as transgender and part of the LGBTQ community on the left. From their perspective, the case was closed, with no foreign hand pulling the strings. Yet Owens' suggestion hinted at something far bigger, a geopolitical shadow cast over Kirk's death. And here lies the larger lesson. Once influencers cross into geopolitics, the stakes shift dramatically. What begins as commentary or content creation can quickly evolve into power struggles with governments, billionaires, and entire nations. That's why figures like Aiden Ross have openly declared they won't touch politics anymore. The risks are simply too high. For creators like Owens or Officer Tatum, stepping into global disputes can mean entering a world they're not prepared for, one where criticism of powerful states might provoke enemies they never imagined. In reality, the FBI's version of events still stands. One man, acting alone, carried out the assassination. Investigators have been consistent in their conclusions, pointing to clear evidence, testimony, and even a confession. From their perspective, there is no shadowy international conspiracy, no foreign hand guiding the trigger. It was the act of a single individual. Yet in the age of social media, certainty doesn't always triumph. Speculation, especially when voiced by figures as influential as Candace Owens, has the power to grow legs of its own. Her comments illustrate how quickly alternative narratives can take hold, fueled not necessarily by hard proof but by emotion, suspicion, and the hunger for a bigger story. And that's the danger of this modern environment, where fame, influence, and money collide with geopolitics. Content creators are no longer just entertainers or commentators. They've become power brokers, shaping public perception with a single post or video. But with that power comes vulnerability. One suggestion, one insinuation, can ignite an entire movement of speculation that overshadows established facts. In Kirk's case, what the FBI ruled as an isolated act has been reframed by some as evidence of deeper, darker battles playing out across international lines. For many in the Black community, this becomes more than just a political story. It serves as a cautionary tale. The pursuit of influence and wealth, when tied to global politics, carries risks that go far beyond online debates or trending topics. A creator who begins by speaking on cultural issues can suddenly find themselves entangled in disputes involving nations, billionaires, and ideologies that don't play by the same rules. In that arena, mistakes aren't just embarrassing, they can be dangerous. That's why some voices within the community urge caution. Sometimes, the wiser path is not to stretch influence into every global conflict, but to channel energy into the struggles that directly impact one's own people. The battles at home, inequality, education, justice, and economic opportunity, are pressing enough without inviting enemies from abroad. By keeping focus local, creators and leaders can protect themselves from the kind of fallout that comes when speculation turns into accusation, and accusation turns into threat.